Vertreibung, Turtle Island, repression, colonization, repressed thoughts of colonized natives whose so-called pagan religions were demonized by social-politically inflated Eurocentric wisdom perpetuated through slaves of the system who claimed to assist them by aiding and abetting an intrinsic religious experience most natives were wary and soon became weary of. And this was really meant to replace plains and lakes by trains, boats, and planes from flakes who came forth from strange places with land claims and plans to enslave races soon to be estranged with their native plains and ancestors' graves in the name of some Caucasian deities, decadent representatives who spoke of paganism without knowing what it meant linguistically in its original Latin sense. So-called Christians used it profusely to belittle and banter those who professed pantheistic or holistic or animistic preferences. If we go back in history, or his story, Vertreibung is perhaps what made some underpaid scribes trace the line between fact and fiction, between lax and more accurate reconstructions of both her and his stories. We so desperately lack in our hopeless and conceitedly misplaced glory. We've already seen and heard the story of how Christopher Columbus, Christ the colon, paved the way for those who came among natives with gifts like infected water, weapons and blankets, things we could easily relate to, except that we ought to have known about holy wars before blindly molding more minds into soldiers of Christ without even knowing for whom we were truly prostrated. Trains and boats and planes, the Nina, the Santa Maria, and the Pinto, 3 blankets full of lies and deceit pulled like wool over our eyes that were meant to be removed and exposed through this piece, replete with symbols, completed with geometric precision, asymmetrical with the expressed intention of uncovering unmentionable blunders in history still covered up because Vertreibung, repression in German, with the capital letter for added emphasis on the word, the same capital letter they tentatively lack to represent when they use the words native, aboriginal, and First Nations, or African American. But no worries though, it's simply a subliminal, unintentional byproduct of ethnocentric guilt and hatred, like what you have against Muslims today, transformed into a subversively coercive statement, like taking the red pill in the Matrix, the same red as the blood painted, dripping from the tainted crosses on those blankets. Perhaps this was meant to be a statement of the horrors Christ suffered on the cross for the greatest of civilizations, or perhaps it was rather meant sarcastically to superpose the blasphemy with the pain of the colonized natives, left with the impression that their sufferings, while unintentional and regrettable, were nonetheless in vain compared to Jesus's, who saved the entire free world with his blood and belief system. So Bob Boyer painted sickly, washed up colors on blankets that became canvases for his pain. The primary colors were decimated like nature in this painting and installation. Well-defined crosses bathed in an iridescent light, white and beige, surrounded by triangles that led our eyes to see the main piece on the stage, a messy cross looking like blotting paper, a cross bleeding the lot of natives who obviously did not discover the Americas. Let's face it, since they were simply savage animals in nature. Pink, violet, and gray blue, Indian and Caucasian skin tones, stylized and color-coded geometrical shapes, and opposite and complementary arrangements to enhance the viewer's sense of a strange angst. Everything pales as he lets his eyes scale towards the center, as if most colors have slowly been bled to death, like the Indians that wish they had at least been killed to be laid to rest. Yet how could this be in a land left breathless, plagued with infections from settlers who divided it into sections, with imaginary lines traced on cartographic projections, based on their conceptions of ownership and tenants, mulch and minerals commodified as private properties and residences. And this is what Boyer is representing, with his use of European travel fetishes wrapped up in maps tied up with chains and wires, or even with pink ribbons to make it seem nicer. A random styrofoam tray as a reminder of stray litter left by colonizing Caucasians made bitter from the inexplicable resistance of First Nations and their reticence to recognize the validity of treaties' words based on supreme authorities of royal patrons, with absurd claims of Crayon to first trace the outlines of the basis for the worst case scenario in relatively recent history. And believe me, this is certainly not ancient. The charting and delineation of uncharted virgin spaces eventually led to their desecration, along with the murder and martyrdom of the races that populated them, left to express their hatred and angst with mixed media and oil over acrylic on blankets.